Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The 2024 Summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation wrapped up on Friday. On Thursday, Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech. He sought to elevate China-Africa relations to an all-weather community with a shared future for the new era. Describing ties at its best in history, he also proposed the bilateral relations between China and all partner African countries to be elevated to strategic relations, calling on both sides to deepen cooperation toward the Global South modernization. So after this year's FOCAC, what are the prospects of China-Africa cooperation and what are the key takeaways from the summit? Let's have our panelists to discuss. On the latest discussion about China-Africa, let's join our panelist in Beijing, He Wenping, professor and director at the Institute of West Asian and African Studies with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and also Joseph Olivier Mandel from Cameroon, head of the African Youth Delegation in China. Welcome to both of you. What is the most significant achievements do you see as FOCAC is wrapping up in Beijing? Professor He.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of achievements has been made. To my, very deep impression, maybe two. Number one is the bilateral relationship between China and Africa has been upgraded to, strategic level, and also the definition of our bilateral relationship has been defined as the all-weather. This China-Africa, this shared community, and in the new era. So put the all-weather in front of this China-African shared community. And even all the African countries, no matter big or small, strong or weak, they all have been upgraded into a strategic level now with China. So this is number one. Number two, because, of course, every FOCAC meeting will come out with action plan. So this time around, this action plan also is 10 areas. But the very impressive thing is the number one. Now, not talk about all other hardware issue like infrastructure, trade, so on and so forth. Now talk about the software issue. That is governance idea, this experiences sharing. So this is also quite impressive.
Among the 10 partnerships that you mentioned, Professor He, civilizations, trade prosperity, industrial chain cooperation, connectivity, development cooperation, health, agriculture, livelihood, culture, and people-to-people exchanges, green development, common security. Well, this is a long list. Joseph, how much do you see all of these areas can be worked on in the near future and have some lower hanging fruits?
Long-term wise, we in the larger scale, we have the institutionalized platforms like the Belt and Road Initiative, right? That is also pushing forward great results. So on the longer term, I see very good results, but a continuation of what has been done since 2018, 2021 in Senegal, and also, this year. But also, it's also very important for African countries because they see China as an inspiring partner, and an inspiring partner in terms of not only poverty alleviation, and Professor He also mentioned a lot of infrastructure kind of related projects.
African nations these days have become the focus of attention for many parts of the world. So how do you see China's competitiveness in this, and also African nations' competitiveness in having and securing a stronger tie with China?
China has never regarded China-African relationship as something like exclusive. So we have been always saying inclusive, this is open. Even we want to join those third-party cooperation with Africa. So the more coming to offer helping hand to Africa, the better. So we never also regarded saying Africa is whose backyard or whose cheese and others cannot move. Actually, Africa is their own. African countries, their land. So the determining right is in the hands of African country, African people themselves. Yeah, they would like to choose multiple partners to develop together. So this is number one. Number two, of course, China also enjoy a lot of competitive advantage. For example, infrastructure. Nowadays, when I travel to Africa, all those infrastructure projects like railway, port, and then roads and the bridge, almost all. Now, Chinese company are doing those construction work. It's hardly to see any other like countries, even not mention India or US or European country, they seems not disappeared from Africa's infrastructure construction. So China willing to do that, and also has capacity to do that, has financial capacity and also technical know-how capacity. So the most important is we are willing to do that. We want to help. So Africa competitive advantage, of course, also strong and getting increasing. For example, middle class income family now is getting more and more, and also this investment environment is getting better and better, and also African their own the governance situation now also has been improving. So these are the potential. Those potential and with China's competitive advantage, not only in infrastructure. Now you see our EV, electronic vehicles, also quite welcome from African side.
Joseph, to you, how competitive are different African nations in seeking cooperation with China? And how do you see different capitals on the African continent are articulating the balance they obviously are eager to keep?
I do believe that Africa and African nations are very competitive, apart from our natural resources, but also Professor He just mentioned the investment environment is actually more and more promising. But Africa, the deal is that African countries are looking into local production, are looking into consolidating the African agencies to be better, to be more competitive, in the world. So we have what we call, for example, the sunrise industries. Sunrise industries are actually some areas that are very promising in the African continent. And Professor He mentioned some. We not limited to even the automobile industry, but we also have pharmaceuticals, also agriculture, etc. So, but also Africa is also has a big potential in terms of its continental agenda, because we have a very huge market, the African continental free trade area, that is actually already on the ground, which has the bigger potential to be one of the biggest markets in the world. So in terms of a market, in terms of potential, in terms of resources, Africa stands out. And the high representations, the huge representation that we are seeing in the FOCAC, this time around, it shows how African countries are willing to deepen their partnership with China, are willing to attract more investments in Africa. We talked about industrialization, that's key.
Earlier, I had an exclusive interview with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres. He talked about the absence of Africa in global governance from the end of the Second World War. At that time, many of the African countries today were still colonized by the West.
Africa is a continent that was a double victim of colonialism. First, because of the impact of colonialism in itself, and second, because as the global governance institutions, the UN, the Bretton Woods system, were created after the Second World War, most of the African countries were not yet existing. They were under colonial rule. And so Africa was not sufficiently represented in our global system. International financial architecture that was created after the Second World War was not created to take sufficiently into account the interests and needs of developing countries. Developing countries are underrepresented. Africa is underrepresented. In this context, because the Chinese-Africa cooperation is the symbol of South-South cooperation, and because China is having an extremely important role in the investment that Africa needs to do to overcome its gaps in infrastructure, its gaps in education, its gaps in health, and the cooperation with China represents an extremely important opportunity for the African continent.
Now, when we are talking about African countries making their voices also heard in global governance, how is the African continent as a whole and some of the important capitals on the African continent articulating the ideas of global south, the ideas of developing countries and emerging economies working hand in hand?
You know, African countries as a whole are seeing cooperation with China, with the cooperation with China in international affairs, very important, and as a way to kind of impact the global governance reform. Taking the example of the African Union, you know, officially being admitted to the G20, now G21 last year, and also as a permanent member. Yeah, and also we saw President Xi attending side meetings, BRICS Africa outreach. Now we're talking about BRICS Plus dialogue during the BRICS leader summits in South Africa. And beside that, the African continent now has more seats in the executive board of the IMF since the last General Assembly in Marrakesh. On the African side, we have the AU Agenda 2063, which summarizes all our needs, all what we're willing to achieve, you know, the African we want. But we are willing to reinforce the African agency. And to be able to do that, we need actually very solid and firm development partners. And that's where China comes in, because China is actually giving up the opportunity. First, China is giving up the example of, achieving development, in your own ways, according to your own terms, tied to with your own culture. But also China is giving us a very a model of South-South cooperation. So a big platform for the global South, or I would say the global majority, to communicate, to interact, because we share actually the same priorities. So I do believe that, the Africans, are having high hopes with the cooperation with China to enhance the narrative, to enhance their positions and their voice in the global communities.
Tell me more about your thoughts, Professor He.
China only through team up with Africa, and then Africans' voice can be heard bigger in the international stage. And also China, our influence and our role for representing this developing country as a whole, also can be strengthened. Because our Foreign Minister Wang Yi often said, he said, our voting rights in this UN Security Council actually is voting for all the developing countries. So that is why China, Africa, we team up together and can make our contribution to this global governance, just Mendo mentioned, the IMF, this World Bank. And now we are also building the AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and also have the BRICS Bank. You see, a global South, developing country now also can make more contribution for this global financial institutions, this infrastructure. So you see, with more countries getting stronger, especially from this global South, I think this North-South, this gap also can be gradually narrowed rather than widened.
China's economy in the transition, its growth rate has been slowed down from the very rapid one of more than 10% or more than 8% to now around 5 to 5.5%. So overseas, whether market or cooperation has become very important for Chinese business community. But at the same time, the amount for investment could also be impacted by the economic realities. And we also see different stories, particularly in the Western press, shaping China-Africa relations as only about financial aid. What is your observation of Chinese business community's commitment to Africa?
Yes, of course, China economy now is facing also difficulty, like GDP growth rate not as high as before. But this is very natural because now we are moving forward. Before it's just the speed matters, but now it's quality matters. Talking about the high quality development model and also focus on green development. So it's not that saying always two digital GDP growth that would be better. But even though now this difficulty is facing, but that's exactly the driving forces for Chinese company now need to go abroad, like go to Africa, go to any other continent to explore new opportunities for this sustainable development. By the way, we also need to pay attention to like not put too much financial burden to all those partner countries. For example, this time Chinese government put forward in the coming 3 years, we will build like 1,000 small and beautiful these projects. The budget is quite small, relatively, not that big. And then the project will come out with quick effect and then goes to grassroots people and improving their living standard immediately. So those projects, small and beautiful, already, you see, pointed to the direction.
Professor He Wenping, Joseph Olivier Mandor, thank you so much for both of you for joining us. Appreciate it.